All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today for the first installment of our SNAP Benefits series. Excuse me, that's a tongue twister. You're here today to get an overview of SNAP benefits and build that foundation to move forward into the next sessions of our training series. This is being recorded. A copy of this recording will be sent out to all registrants. We also were approved for CLE credit. At the end, I will put that CLE information into the chat. That CLE information will also be sent out to all registrants. Folks should see live captioning at the bottom of the screen. If you don't, please reach out to me and I'll try to troubleshoot with you to make that happen. And I think the last housekeeping matter is questions and answers. You are certainly encouraged to ask questions. And if time permits, I will present your questions to our speakers to answer at the end. So if you do have a question that comes up while you're listening, please feel free to pop it in the chat or pop it into the Q&A. And at the end, if time permits, I will read those out loud. So I always take too long with housekeeping. It's a Friday. I know the rules are boring on Friday. So I will jump in and start with introductions of our speakers here today. So in no particular order, we have Valerie Greenfield. Valerie obtained her bachelor's degree with high honors from the University of Florida, where she majored in sociology. She received her law degree from the University of Miami School of Law and is a member of the Florida Bar. Go Cane! Before joining Florida Senior Legal Helpline at Bay Area Legal in 2015, Valerie was a staff attorney and later department head in the Public Benefits Unit at the Legal Services of Greater Miami for 11 years. Thereafter, she served for 19 years as senior staff attorney at Florida Legal Services, providing training, consultation, and litigation support to statewide advocates in public benefits. We thank you so much for being here, Valerie, and dedicating your time to teach us. And then we also have Cindy Huddleston. Cindy received her BA from the University of Tennessee and her JD from Case Western Reserve University. Cindy is an attorney with over 35 years of experience advocating to strengthen public assistance programs for low-income Floridians. Before joining the Florida Policy Institute, Cindy worked at Florida Legal Services and the Legal Services of Greater Miami, where she represented indigent clients to maximize access to programs that provide work supports, such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistant Program, SNAP, reemployment assistance, and temporary assistance for needy families. Cindy focuses on safety net programs for low-income Floridians and has extensive experience as an advocate and a lobbyist for policies that promote financial security for all Floridians. Thank you so much, Cindy, for being here with us today. I feel very lucky to be with both of these two wonderful women helping promote this training. And I am going to share my screen and turn it over to Cindy, who's going to get us started. Bear with me. I just had this up, of course, and then this happened. Why is this doing this now? I apologize, folks. I just had this up, and of course, this happens right when we get started. It's because it's a Friday and there was a thunderstorm last night that's throwing everybody off. All right, this should work now. Okay. All right. Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you, Alexis. And go to the next slide, please. The objective today is really just to get to know SNAP, to learn the very basic terminology used in the program. We want to give you an overview of the SNAP application process and common issues that you are likely to see if you represent SNAP participants. And we just want you to become familiar too with issues that frequently arise when DCF determines the amount of SNAP someone can get. Next slide, please. SNAP is a federally funded program operated by the Food and Nutrition Service of USDA. It provides grocery assistance every month for families or households with low income. The federal and state governments share the administrative costs of the program, with the federal government contributing almost half of those costs. However, and this is a big however, the federal government pays 100% of the SNAP benefits that are provided to households. SNAP is the largest nutrition assistance program administered by USDA, and it goes a really long way to supplement the food buying power of eligible households. In Florida, SNAP is administered by the Department of Children and Families, DCF, but the Department of Economic Opportunity, DEO, runs the employment and training side of it, the work requirement side of it. DCF and DEO are supposed to operate SNAP in accordance with federal law, and they also have to conform to state law and state rules, and those state rules are in the Florida Administrative Code. Next slide. So why is SNAP important to households who are struggling? Right now, about 1 in every 12 Floridians participate in SNAP. And of course, that number varies depending on what the economy looks like, the state of the pandemic. During the pandemic, the number of Floridians participating in SNAP is much higher. But nevertheless, after California and Texas, Florida has the most SNAP participants in the entire country. And with rising food prices, benefits are very important. This is because SNAP participants have very low income. About 80% live in poverty. About 81% of SNAP households include a child, a senior, or a person with a disability. And although SNAP benefits are extremely modest, you know, the average benefit for each Florida household member is about $167 a month. Even though they're really modest, those benefits go a long way towards, you know, eliminating food insecurity and freeing up the household income to be able to buy other things or to spend that money on other needs like housing. Next slide. So given how critical SNAP is, it's important to know, you know, how do you interact with DCF? How do you apply? You know, what's in place? In 2004, DCF implemented, you know, a massive overhaul in how it administers SNAP by closing offices and starting to rely on technology to do business with the public. And believe it or not, since then, DCF has closed all offices in 1/3 of Florida counties. 1/3 of the counties don't even have a DCF office. It's something that they had to do or chose to do based on budget cuts from the legislature. And they call it modernization. Modernization was touted and continues to be touted as a way to simplify the application process and reduce administrative costs and to improve client access and services. You know, and honestly, modernization has a lot of things going for it. You don't have to sit in a waiting room at a DCF office for hours to apply. Instead, you can use your computer to apply online. You don't have to take off work or school to apply. You do it when it's convenient for you. And if you need to talk to DCF, you can call them through the call center. And everyone who answers is your caseworker. No longer does just one person hold the key to your case. Of course, I'm saying that with the caveat that I'm assuming you can get through to DCF, because since the start of the pandemic, it has been very hard to get through to the call center, and there are extremely long wait times. DCF has recruited community partners who do the job that DCF used to do by, you know, counseling applicants and in some cases really digging in and helping them through the application process. Unlike DCF offices, there are community partners in every single county, but they are for the most part volunteers, and their hours can be irregular at best. And they may not be able to dig in and really help you. They may only be able to show you a seat at a computer in a corner at their office. The services they offer really vary depending on the organization. and some only serve specific populations, for example, like homeless folks. So despite the good things about use of technology, the new world of modernization has glaring flaws, like shortages of staff at call centers and the ability to help folks who need help the most, people who may be confined to their homes or aren't computer literate or who have language barriers or who have a complicated case that needs real help from DCF to work through. The bottom line about modernization is that if modernization works for you, it works really well. But if it doesn't, those folks may very well fall through the cracks. Next slide. And how do you actually get benefits in this modernized state? Benefits are accessed through electronic benefit transfer or EBT cards. They're just like debit cards. Benefits are posted in an account on a plastic card embedded with a magnetic strip. The EBT card is usually mailed to first-time participants, but you reuse that same card if you're continuing to participate in a program after that first month. You can check your balance on receipts at the grocery store in most cases, online at a card holder portal, or you can call the EBT Customer Service Center at 1-888-356-3281. Next slide. And we just wanted to give you some important websites that you may want to look at as you start out on your journey with SNAP. DCF has overviews of its safety net programs, including SNAP and TANF and Medicaid online. And we also wanted to give you links to those service centers, the DCF brick and mortar offices that still exist, as well as a link for folks to look up community partners in their area. And these are very important as people realize they might need help with their benefits, but don't have, for example, a service center in the area. So now for more information on applying for SNAP, I'm going to hand this off to Val, who is the real star of our show today. Val?
Oh, next slide. Okay, I don't know why Cindy says that. We both only recently, or we still at this late date in our careers are finding out new information about the SNAP program when we're both only as expert as the rest of you. Okay, so applying for SNAP. You do that, as Cindy mentioned, online in this new environment, and that's at the Access website. That is the preferred method to apply. But if you cannot use that website and you can't get to it, a community partner or a public library where you can use a computer, you can use a paper form. It will take a little longer for your application to be determined, but you can get that paper form by downloading it off of the Access platform, or you can ask DCF to send you a copy, or ask a community partner to download a copy and hand it to you. And in some cases, the community partners may mail you a hard copy. You have the right to apply on the day you first contact the Department of Children and Families. And under law, you are permitted to apply with only your name, address, and signature. And that's whether you are applying by paper or online. That is a federal right. And that helps establish the first day from which you will get food stamps when your application is ultimately approved. We encourage people to retain proof of the date they apply, because as I just mentioned, that will determine the retro benefit date, the retroactive date to which your benefits will go back. And it also sets out the beginning of processing time limits that the department must comply with in order to determine your food stamp application within the bounds of law. Next. So who actually applies for this program? A SNAP application is made on behalf of, quote unquote, a household, or quote unquote, an assistance group, which we also refer to as an AG, the initials AG standing for assistance group. And an assistance group or a household is an individual or a group of people living together who purchase and prepare their meals together. There is no same address test if different people in a home purchase and prepare their food separately from each other. But economies of scale are considered in determining the amount of benefits people get by virtue of the assistance group unit. So the more households under one roof, the more actual dollars in benefits each of those households living under the same roof will get. What we mean by economies of scale are simply explained this way. When households, two different roommates are living together and they each like a different ketchup, they're each going to buy a ketchup, possibly the smaller size because they're an individual. But if they apply together for food stamps and they can compromise on the kind of ketchup they like, they might buy the larger size for the two of them and save money. So that's how the department and the Department of Food and Nutrition Services of the US Department of Agriculture have come up with the idea that a household living together who purchases and prepares their meals together will get benefits based on that amount of people. Next slide. Notwithstanding that I've said that the roommates could apply separately from each other and each get their own food stamps, and then of course each have to buy their own ketchup, there are certain mandatory household rules. So for these groups, even if they live together and buy and prepare their food, whether or not they buy and prepare their food together, they must be considered together as one household. So one assistance group, and they must apply as one assistance group. Husbands and wives within the same dwelling have to apply as one unit for this program. Kids under 22 living with their parents have to apply with those people as one unit. And children under 18 under the parental control of an adult in the dwelling have to apply together as one unit for this program. And sometimes that hurts people because you're counting income of people who don't actually want to be in the program. But these are what they call mandatory households, even if they buy their own food and prepare their food separately from each other. They have to apply as a single unit. Next slide. So we have a shameless plug here. We will be doing more training on the concept of households. Florida Legal Services is presenting a training on maximizing SNAP benefits on August 22nd, 2022, so in a couple months. And at that training, we're going to look more closely at these household rules in greater detail, as well as a concept called the excess medical deductions. And we're going to work through some hypotheticals. So we want you to mark your calendars so we can do a deeper dive into how to maximize food stamps for the various clients you'll be representing. Next slide. All right, we have a poll question now. So Alexis, would you launch that poll? We want to ask you whether, for which of the following pairs of folks is there a SNAP advantage in applying if they buy and prepare their own food? Which of the following? You can pick as many answers as you want. And then Alexis is going to tell us what you've said, and then we'll go over the answers. So we've got Jan and Dean, unrelated roommates, Hansel and Gretel, adult siblings sharing an apartment. Number 3 is a dad living with his 22-year-old daughter. Number 4 is an adult aunt living with an 18-year-old niece. And the last one is a 60-year-old mom living with an adult son. Alexis, what did people pick?
And we still have some folks that are chiming in, Val. So let me give it one more second because I see the number going up and up and up.
Okay.
And now we have a stall. So I will, oh, one more came in last minute. Sorry if I cut you off. I'm sorry. And
That's
here
all
are
right.
our results.
Okay. So let's go over this. Yes, there's definitely advantage to Jan and Dean, unrelated roommates, if they purchase and prepare their own food from purchase and prepare separately from each other, and they each apply for food stamps separately, then they will bring more dollars actually into their home. Or if Dean has a really high-paying job and Jan doesn't, Jan can apply for food stamps separately because he or she does not purchase and prepare with Dean. Hansel and Gretel, same situation actually as Jan and Dean. They have an advantage in applying separately from each other if they purchase and prepare their food separately from each other. Number 3, the dad, same as Jan and Dean, a dad living with his 22-year-old daughter. Each of them may have an advantage in applying separately for food stamps. The 22-year-old daughter may have very low income, and she at 22 can be considered her own household, even though she's living with a parent. So 22 is that age, that magical age when you can apply by yourself. And then we have the adult aunt living with an 18-year-old niece. 18-year-old niece can apply separately, or if the 18-year-old niece is just really uncooperative, the adult aunt can apply separately and doesn't have to consider the 18-year-old niece because they buy and prepare their food separately, and 18 is the cutoff for a non-child who is living with an adult. And then finally, we have the 60-year-old mom living with an adult son. Well, we just tried to trick you a little bit on that one. We didn't say how old the adult son is. Some people considered people to be adults at 18, some at 21, but they will have to apply together. There will be no advantage if they apply separately because they're not permitted to apply separately even if they buy and prepare their own food together, if that son is under 22. Okay. So thanks for doing that poll. Next slide, Cindy's going to take it over for a little bit again.
Okay, so what happens after you apply? You've been able to apply, you've established who's in your household. What happens next? Unless you're eligible for expedited service, and that is for households that are especially in crisis financially, except for those households, you have to be interviewed. Only one person from the household has to be interviewed, the responsible household member. So you don't have to have every member of your household sitting there in the interview, just one person. You can, in theory, be interviewed on the day you apply, but normally what will happen is that DCF will send you an appointment notice asking you to call them, on a specific date or by a specific date. If you want, though, you can ask that DCF come to your house or to some other agreed upon location to be interviewed. Obviously this rarely, if ever, happens, but it is a right that can be exercised in cases where that's appropriate, like if you don't have a phone and you have no other way of being interviewed. If you miss your interview, DCF has to reschedule it and give you a second chance if you ask for it. But if you try to have your interview and you can't get through to DCF, and this is a common problem, you have a good defense if DCF ends up denying you because you allegedly failed to attend your interview. And as I said, this is a very common problem, especially now with the staff shortage at the call centers and with DCF staff in general. Next slide. So what happens in an interview? Why even have one at all? Interviews are required by federal law. And during the interview, DCF is supposed to review the application with you to clear up any questions that it has, and to talk about what verification it needs to help establish certain facts. You don't have to verify every single fact in your application, but you will have to for certain things, for example, identity. And you will also have to, if for some reason DCF deems that information to be questionable. So that going over the application with you in an interview is to help DCF decide what information it needs to verify, and just to make sure that you've answered appropriately and said what you meant to say. One important thing to keep in mind is that seniors and persons with disabilities should absolutely talk with DCF about any out-of-pocket health costs they have during the interview. This is called, well, this is because anything over $35 will reduce your net income and let you get more benefits. This is called the excess medical expense deduction in SNAP. And it's a very important but very underutilized thing that, if used more, would really help significantly in raising folks' benefits, especially for seniors who have been really bad about claiming these. And of course, a lot of this is not because seniors just don't want to claim them. A lot of people don't know that they have the right to do this, and they don't realize how many out-of-pocket expenses might be able to be counted. So we just really encourage you to be vigilant about this with your clients. Next slide. So what is verification? What suffices as verification? The bottom line here is that verification should never, ever keep someone from establishing eligibility. There are a myriad of ways to verify something for DCF. You can do it through documents or papers like pay stubs and school records. And these can be uploaded into your online access account, or you can even fax or mail them or drop them off to DCF. And as Val mentioned earlier about the application itself, we really encourage folks to keep copies of any verification that they submit to DCF, because it's not infrequent that DCF will say that they never got it. So it's very important to keep proof of some sort that you've submitted this. Some verification is done automatically through an exchange of computer data or information with other agencies, both state and federal agencies, like motor vehicles, Social Security, the Department of Labor, the Child Support Office. You can ask DCF to use a collateral contact if you can't verify something in some other way. A collateral contact is defined as a verbal or written confirmation of a household circumstances by a third party who has firsthand knowledge of client's circumstances. And to give you an example of how this might work is if you need to verify your housing, you can do this if you don't have a rental agreement. You could ask DCF to call your landlord, or you could get a letter from your landlord that states information about your housing and your rental costs. And finally, DCF can make a personal contact, and that's usually a home visit, but only if you agree to it. For example, if you're homebound and you don't have any way to verify your eligibility, you may want DCF to come to you. In the past, folks have been very reluctant to want to have a state agency come to their house and get into their business, but there are some situations where this may be the only way that DCF can verify some facts about your eligibility. Next slide. There are some really important concepts to know about the verification process, because many people get denied for failure to verify. Many we believe that should not have been denied. Some things that you need to know are that the burden to verify questionable information or information that must be verified is primarily on the household. And that means you do have the primary duty to provide that verification. And again, we really urge you to keep proof when you submit verification that you submitted it. But this is also very important. If it is difficult or impossible for someone to get the verification, or they submit verification and DCF says it's not sufficient, DCF is supposed to offer help. Their rule says that if the information, documentation, or verification is difficult for the individual to obtain, the department must provide assistance in obtaining it when requested or when it appears necessary. So although we always urge people to request help with getting verification when they're having problems, in theory, this is something that DCF is supposed to offer when it appears necessary. The bottom line is DCF cannot deny an application that lacks verification without offering help. And another important principle is that the inability to verify is not the same as a refusal to verify. And DCF under federal law is not supposed to deny you for failing to verify something unless you're actually refusing to. So this is another thing to keep in mind. And finally, one other important point is that DCF can't insist on only one type of document or just one way to verify something. The document just needs to reasonably prove the questioned information. And as an example for that, if DCF wants to prove information about your housing, they can't say, you have to give me a written rental agreement. You may not have one. You have so many other ways to try to verify that housing, your housing costs and your housing arrangements, however. So they can't say you have to bring in one particular form of verification. Anything that tends to prove it is something that should suffice. And so now I want to hand it back to Val to talk more about how people financially qualify for SNAP.
Thank you. Next slide. So as we said at the beginning, SNAP helps boost the food purchasing power of low and no income households. It is a means-tested program. So that means there are financial qualifications. The household's income and assets are examined, and generally the household must meet the limits of this program or they won't be eligible. Keep in mind, there's both a gross and net income test, but interestingly, in Florida, the majority of assistance groups have no asset test, which is great. But the income tests and asset tests are more flexible even when they apply for certain assistance groups. Next. The precise financial test applied to the household or the assistance group depends on something called their category. So when I talk about the income and asset tests being more flexible for certain groups, that means that for certain categories of how they are not going to impose those rules as strictly. The concept of something called categorical eligibility was created to simplify the process of applying for the poorest assistance groups, to simplify the state's processing of cases, to keep eligible people in the program, and to minimize errors by the state. We like categorical eligibility because it does all of those things. And the asset and income test, as I mentioned, will depend on the category that the assistance group falls in. Next slide. I'm not going to dig too deep on these categories. We're going to save that for a later presentation. But I want you to know that these are the three categories that are used in Florida. First, there's categorically eligible. These people are abbreviated CAT-L. These are people whose income is SSI and or TANF. Then there is broad-based categorical eligibility. That's for people who have income other than SSI and TANF, but DCF gives them, quote unquote, gives them information on TANF during the application process. It's kind of a squishy category, but it's good that we have it because lots of people fall into it. And as I mentioned, the income and asset tests are more flexible for those two groups. Everyone else in Florida falls into the catch-all of all others. And that would be households with a disqualified member who happen to have been disqualified due to a past felony, food stamp fraud, or non-compliance with employment and training. Or they are a senior or a person with a disability whose income is over 200% of the federal poverty limit. Those folks get more strict asset and income tests. Next category. Sorry, next slide. I got carried away with my categories. Here's another shameless plug. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing more training September at a precise date to be announced, I believe in late September. Florida Legal Services is going to present another training on calculating SNAP benefits. And that's when we'll look more closely at these assistance group categories and how those influence the use of a SNAP budget worksheet. We'll probably work through some hypos, so keep an eye out for that announcement. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit more about assets because sometimes asset tests do apply. Let's go. Next slide. What are assets? Notice this slide says resources because I use the term assets and resources interchangeably for purposes of this presentation, for purposes of the SNAP program. Resources are any available assets, whether liquid or not. They are funds in the bank, cash on hand, stocks, bonds, or certificates of deposit. Note those aren't liquid. It is also non-homestead real estate or land. And then things like trusts, for which there are special rules for counting them. Key takeaway here is if you have a valuable asset and you're going to be subjected to an asset test, do not give away that asset for less than fair market with the idea that you're going to become eligible for SNAP, because that won't work. Next slide. Sometimes resources are not considered, even if you could define it as a resource. For example, or you could define it as an asset. For example, your home and the land surrounding your home and the furnishings in your home are not counted as an asset for the purposes of this SNAP program, even if you're subject to an asset test. Personal effects, also not an asset. In Florida, vehicles are not counted. Some burial arrangements will not be considered an asset. And then some assets which are unavailable are not considered when there's legal restrictions to their access or they are not accessible to circumstances beyond the control of the individual who owns it. And as I mentioned, for some categories like broad-based categorical eligibility and categorical eligibility, there's no asset test at all. For everyone else, there is an asset test and it's $2,500 for the household, unless the household contains an aged or person with a disability. Next slide. Then it's $3,750. Sorry. Income. So we've just talked about assets. Let's look a little bit at income. Next slide. What income is counted? Earned and unearned income both count in the SNAP program. Earned income is, I guess, anything that you earn from a job. I think we all know about that. Wages from any source and from any member, it counts. Unearned income also from any source for any member counts. And examples of unearned income are SSI, TANF, child support, unemployment compensation, known as reemployment assistance here in Florida. And some income that you don't actually have in your hand is presumed received. If you are a non-citizen sponsor if you are a non-citizen who happens to be eligible for food stamps based on your non-citizen status, but you are deemed to be receiving funds from your non-citizen sponsor, even if the sponsor doesn't give you the money, that income is going to be counted for food stamp purposes. Any wages that are garnished are going to be counted, or income that's withheld from you to recover a past means-tested public assistance overpayment due to non-compliance with program rules. That income is still counted even if it doesn't make it into your hand. Next slide. But some income's not considered even when it's defined as income and received. So 20% of earned income is deducted and some other income is excluded from the food stamp program budget. Student income, for those who are under 18 and in school, their income is not counted as income to the household. Infrequent income, that would be $30 or less per quarter. Sometimes you might get a birthday gift, so that wouldn't be counted. And some help from outsiders is not counted when it comes in these two forms, vendor payment or in kind. A vendor payment is when an outsider, a third party, directly pays your creditor. When your aunt sends money to Florida Power and Light, sends it directly to Florida Power and Light to pay your bill, and doesn't give you the money, that's a vendor payment, and it doesn't count as income to your household for food stamp purposes. Or when that same aunt sends you a case of diapers for your child, that does not count because it's in-kind, non-cash help. Next slide. There are deductions from income in addition to the income that's not counted, or the income and the earned income deduction I just mentioned of 20%. Everyone gets a standard disregard from their income based on their assistance group size. That can range from $177 to $246. It comes right off their income and looks as though they don't even have it. As Cindy mentioned, unreimbursed out-of-pocket medical expenses that exceed $35 for persons who are seniors, age 60 and over, or persons getting disability benefits. Those will be deducted from your income and not counted in the food stamp budget. Dependent care that you pay out doesn't count as income, so it's deducted. Child support that the assistance group pays out, you get a deduction for. And you get a deduction for some shelter costs that you pay, plus an allowance for utilities. The results of all these deductions that are taken from your income in the food stamp budgeting process nets a result income, and those gross or net figures are compared to the gross and net income tests, which are based on a percent of the federal poverty limit, to determine whether you have passed those tests to go on to receive food stamps, depending on your household size. Next. So depending on your household size, how much SNAP do you get? Well, the United States Department of Agriculture sets benefit allotment levels yearly. In 2022, for example, the maximum allotment for a single person is $250, and the minimum is $20. And let me just go back to something. We were talking about the households and splitting up the households. So if two individuals like Jan and Dean, the unrelated roommates, apply for households and happen to qualify for the maximum allotment, they'll each get $250. So that means that $500 in food stamp benefits will be coming into their house. But if they apply together, the maximum allotment for two in 2020 is $459. So slightly less than 500, which is why we were telling you about that household concept. In any event, the minimum that the USDA, minimum allotment you can get for food stamps in 2022, if you qualify for food stamps at all, will be $20. You won't get less than 20. Every assistance group's income is subject to this federal formula, which is created in federal regulation. And the deductions and credits and allowances are built into that formula. Although there are annual adjustments to many of these, for example, the standard deduction changes. In any event, as I've tried to explain, the results after all of these deductions are compared to the maximum allotment for your particular household size. Assistance groups often get less than the maximum. They're a little surprised by this, but it's very often true, especially if their housing expenses are low or if their income is particularly high, or both, because that's going to affect the way the mathematical formula works out. You may have heard that the department was giving maximum allotments to everybody during the COVID public health emergency. Those were called emergency allotments, but those stopped in August of 2021. However, those are still available for the department to give if there is a nationally declared disaster, if we apply for a disaster declaration after, for example, a weather emergency. So you might still see that people get the maximum, even if their income is higher than you would expect in such a situation. Next slide. Okay, poll question. Which of these is considered in the budget to determine the amount of SNAP the assistance group gets? Assets with legal barriers is the first choice. Assets with legal barriers to availability. Second, unreimbursed out-of-pocket medical expenses of the elderly disabled, which exceed $35. Third choice, the value of the home the assistance group lives in. And the fourth choice, in-kind contributions and vendor payments by third-party outsiders. Which of those, and you can mark more than one answer, are considered in the budget to determine the amount of SNAP benefits the assistance group gets. Go ahead and mark your answers, and Alexis will tell us what we got.
All right, and we have them continuing to trickle in. I'm going to give it a little more time. Thank you all for participating and being so active. They're still coming. All right, I'm going to call it.
Yeah, call it. What do we got? Okay. Well, it looks like the winner was the second one, unreimbursed out-of-pocket medical expenses of the elderly and disabled that exceed $35. Cindy and I are thrilled that 84% of you realize that that is something that's considered in the budget, gets deducted from income, and helps the assistance group get more food stamps. People correctly identified that the value of the home you live in is not considered in the budget. First of all, a home would be an asset, and assets are not considered in the budgeting process. That's a separate test. Assuming you meet the asset test, the budgeting looks at your income. Top answer, assets with legal barriers to availability. Again, that is not considered in the budgeting process. To the extent that it's even considered as part of the asset test, an asset with a legal barrier to availability would not be considered at all as an asset. And finally, the fourth answer, in-kind contributions and vendor payments by third-party outsiders. Now, ordinarily, you might consider those income, but as we have explained, that when they show up as non-cash payments or as cash payments to people you owe and the money never comes into your hand, they're not income. So they're considered, the manner in which you're getting that help will be considered, but it doesn't affect your income, so it won't be in the budget. So that was sort of that answer could have gone either way, and we're glad that people picked up on that. Next slide. Okay, a word about over and under. Sometimes, after all of this careful budgeting, the assistance group gets the wrong amount. When that happens, if they got too much, they can be charged with an overpayment. That's when the department said that they got more than they were eligible for. And that can happen due to an inadvertent error, a plain old mistake that wasn't intentional by the household or even by the department. But it can also happen when there is intentional fraud. In any event, no matter how it happened, when they're charged with an overpayment, the assistance group has hearing rights to challenge this. And even if they lose the hearing, they still have the right to ask for compromise. That would be a waiver where they ask the department to write off the overpayment. That's available to people if it was a non-fraud overpayment. There's some situations where it's going to be automatic if they get the waiver. In other situations, they'll get the waiver if they can demonstrate that their income would not be sufficient over the next 3 years to pay the entire overpayment. When they're not overpaid, sometimes people can be underpaid. And that's when the assistance group actually got less than they were eligible for. And when that kind of a mistake is discovered and the department is notified, the department must restore back benefits as soon as the error comes to its attention, although they don't have to go back more than 12 months if the error was a long-standing error. I think Cindy's going to take it over. Next slide.
So you've applied, your household is eligible, you're waiting expectantly for those benefits. When do you have to get those? When does DCF have to make sure that you have those benefits in your hands? Well, in most cases, benefits have to be provided in 30 days. However, there is an exception for cases that are called expedited cases. Those are the folks who are in really significant financial straits and need benefits much more quickly. You qualify for this expedited processing if you have less than $150 in gross income and liquid assets of not over $100, or your combined gross income and assets are less than your rent and utilities, or you're a migrant or seasonal worker and your job is over and you've already gotten your last paycheck, or if any new income that you're going to get is not over $25 and it's not expected for 10 days. So there are two different standards here. There's the 30-day standard and the 7-day standard if you're eligible for expedited service. Most people will be subject to the 30-day time standard. Next slide, please. So you've gone through the whole application process. You've had your interview. You've provided your verification. You've even gotten your assistance. You don't have to do this all over again every month, do you? The answer to that, luckily, is no. You'll have a certification period. And that certification period lets you get benefits for a set period of time unless something, kind of drastic happens. Certification periods are for 3, 6, or 12 months at a time, depending on your household circumstances. But there's one very big exception to that. And that's for SunCap certification, which is for 4 years, which is unheard of. It's a really long standard. And for those of you who aren't familiar with SunCap is a special food assistance program for people who get SSI. If you get food assistance benefits through the SunCap program, you're automatically going to you could get SNAP without any additional application, no additional paperwork, no additional interview. So it's something that can be very helpful for people who are receiving SSI. Everyone else is going to have to recertify probably at least once a year. But the good news is that DCF has to remind you about your need to recertify by sending you what's called a notice of expiration of certification period. Now, if there's a drastic enough change before you're due to recertify, you have to report that change under what's called simplified reporting. And all this means is that by the 10th day of the month following the change, you have to report certain things. Those two things that are considered drastic enough to have to report are if your monthly gross income exceeds 130% of the federal poverty level for your household size, or if you're what's called an ABOD, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, if you're someone who's subject to mandatory employment and training, if your work hours drop below 20 hours a week, you're supposed to notify the department. So let's say that someone gets a small increase, a raise at work. If that raise does not take them over 130% of the federal poverty level, that's not something that they have to report until they have their next recertification. So in a lot of ways, people, I think, do tend to get very confused and concerned and worried that if they don't report any small little change in their income, that could work against them. But they just need to always remember that what is important is that you only have to report changes in your income if that puts you over the 130% of the federal poverty level. Okay, which brings me, next slide, to work requirements and time limits. And let me just quickly go through this. This is something that we can get into later in another training if this is something that interests folks. But first, time limits. Okay, able-bodied adults without dependents, and that's what the federal law calls them, ABODs. This is not something that we made up. But ABODs, unless they're exempt, they have to work or be in a training activity, it's called ENT, for 80 hours a month, or face a time limit of 3 months in a 3-year period. Time limits really do work to people's disadvantage because a lot of folks who are SNAP participants don't necessarily have the same employment opportunities of everyone else, but it doesn't matter under this federal law. The good news is that time limits are waived during the national public health emergency. However, Florida does impose work requirements or ENT requirements on ABODs, and those are not waived during the public health emergency. Time limits and work requirements are really two different things. And if you're required to participate in work or an ENT program, you'll be sanctioned if you don't comply. You may not have it counted against you for time limit purposes, but you may receive a sanction and lose your benefits all the same. And those E&T requirements have not been waived during the public health emergency, just the time limits. Next slide. Luckily, not everyone is subject to time limits or to E&T work requirements. And I won't go over all the exemptions and good cause reasons, but I did want to give you a slide that includes some of the more common exemptions and good cause, and that you can refer to those later if you need to. And also you can reach out to me or to Val about this if you have this come up. Next slide, please. So federal and state law, both in statutes and case law, is well developed when it comes to due process in the SNAP program. And again, for time's sake, I'm not going to go through every single case in which DCF has to provide due process. But the bottom line is that DCF has to provide you written, timely, and adequate notice detailing the reasons for a denial or a proposed termination, and give you an effective opportunity to defend against the action in an appeal. And they have to give you this notice either online or through snail mail, but it's your choice. Next slide, please. So you get a notice, but you disagree with it. Do you have recourse? Yes, you do. You can informally contact DCF to discuss your case. And this is something that can often result in a very quick turnaround on DCF's part on whatever decisions they've made. However, it's really important that if you decide to informally try to pursue resolution with DCF, that you don't miss the time limits that are listed in your notice for requesting a hearing. Even if you think it's headed in the right direction, DCF is going to agree to reverse its decision. If it has not been formalized, and we suggest it be formalized in writing, you need to go ahead and request that hearing. You can still pursue informal negotiation with DCF, even if you have a fair hearing request pending. So at all costs, preserve those appeal rights. If DCF has made a mistake in the past 12 months, Valerie had mentioned this earlier, you can ask for a restoration of those lost benefits. And it's kind of a hack to get around if you miss the appeal deadline. Even if you missed your appeal deadline, you can still have some way to at least try to get benefits back for the past 12 months. If DCF made a mistake, you have to request a restoration of your lost benefits. And finally, you can request a fair hearing. Fair hearings normally have to be requested in 90 days. However, if you want to get your SNAP continued pending your fair hearing decision, let me read to you what the standard is now. We used to say you have to request a hearing within 10 days, but that's been changed a little bit in recent years. Right now, if you ask for a hearing by the end of the last day of the month prior to the effective date of the adverse action, your benefits will likely continue until the hearing decision. There is one caveat for that, though. If your certification period expires before that, then your right to continued benefits will also expire when your certification period expires. Finally, you can appeal to the DCA if you lose. And this is something that's been that legal services advocates have been quite successful in doing, in the past few decades. Next slide, please. For a much deeper dive on appeals, we hope that you're going to attend FLS's training on July 22nd, led by LSGMI. And that training will look at pre-litigation resolutions, appeal steps, what to expect at fair hearings, and more. So with that, I want to turn this back over to Val to do our less hypothetical and to take us out. Thanks, Val.
Next slide. Okay, a poll question. Which of the following is true? Adversely affected persons must contact the department by fax within 5 days before they can proceed with a fair hearing. Notices must give reasons for agency action. That's the second selection. Number 3, once you get the wrong amount of benefits, you're stuck with the error. And number 4, the poll questions in this course are really quite annoying. You can pick as many answers as you want. So go ahead and quickly mark that because we don't want to keep you. No stragglers this time, please. You got the hang of these.
All right, they're coming in, they're coming in. And I am going to, coming in. This is always fun. It's like watching a race. All right, I'm gonna call it.
There are no cash prizes. We got to tell people. Okay, let's go over the answers. Adversely affected persons must contact the department by fax within 5 days before they can proceed with a fair hearing appeal. That is not true. You have no obligation to contact DCF before proceeding with a fair hearing. If you did contact DCF, you're not limited but in the amount of days you have to contact them, and you're not limited to fax. You can go straight to a fair hearing if you want. We just suggest you might get a faster resolution if you contact DCF first, but don't lose sight of those appeal hearing deadlines. Number 2, notices give reasons for agency action. That is true. And that is a fundamental concept of due process. We don't always think the notices give great reasons, and sometimes the reasons are very vague, and sometimes the reasons are missing, but the law is that they must give reasons for agency action. Oh, number 3, once you get the wrong amount of benefits, you're stuck with the error. Nobody picked that as true, and you guys are winners. That is not true. So you can ask for a restoration if you see you got the wrong amount of benefits. And even if you got the wrong amount of benefits and the notice you got was more than 90 days ago, you can ask DCF in writing, probably best way to do it, for a restoration to correct that error. And then if they don't correct it, you have a new point of entry to ask for a fair hearing. So that's what Cindy meant when she said it's a way around a missed deadline. And last one, the poll questions, of course, are really quite annoying. Only 5% of the people said that was true. So I'm going to take that as a personal compliment. Next slide. A word about citizens versus non-citizens. All citizens are eligible for the SNAP program if they meet the SNAP financial criteria. After all, it's a means-tested program, so they have to meet the financial criteria. But not all non-citizens are eligible for this program, even if they meet the SNAP financial criteria. Eligibility for non-citizens in the SNAP program is complicated. There are multiple factors which are considered, such as the arrival date, their age, their immigrant classification, to name a few. And that this is a subject that is a little too complex for this overview. If there were sufficient interest, I'm sure there could be a separate training on it. But I'll tell you what you should do if you've got a non-citizen question about public benefits. Put it on the listserv. The floridaadvocate.org website has a public benefits practice area. Join that practice area. Join the listservs. Post your questions in that listserv, and you will get people who know what they're talking about to answer. In fact, you can contact me directly if the person is 60 or over. I'd be happy to answer. Look it up. I'm going to have to look it up. I always have to look it up. Next slide. So that's the extent of this overview. We want to thank SNAP fans everywhere. We hope that those of you who were not SNAP fans before will now be SNAP fans, and make sure that all your clients are getting SNAP. These are the emails at which you can contact Cindy and me. And Alexis, we want to ask if there's been any questions, or if anyone wants to submit any questions now, they can.
Awesome. And I apologize. When I'm doing the screen sharing, it's tough for me to manage the chat and put in the CLE and stuff like that, because I'm focused
Sure.
on the screen sharing. So bear with me while I close that out. You folks should no longer be seeing the PowerPoint. I'm going to put the CLE in the chat. And in the meantime, I did not see any questions, but I don't think that doesn't mean that folks, might not have them later. So as you saw, you have the information to both of our wonderful presenters, and I'm going to encourage them to bother you both if anybody needs anything. So bear with me. I want to put the CLE in here because I normally do it beforehand, but I really didn't want y'all to see my mouse going crazy on the screen. 7, 5, 1, 4.
I see a question. How do you respond to a client who says it's too much trouble to apply for SNAP when his or her benefits would be only $20 a month? Well, I can answer that question real quickly if we have some time.
Yep.
One thing we say to people is if I gave you a $20 coupon at the grocery store, you'd probably use it, not throw it away. So think of it like that. And the other thing you could tell somebody who says it's too much trouble to apply, chances are good that if their income is stable, they'll be certified for a long period of time, perhaps only 12 months, perhaps as long as 12 months. And they won't have to keep doing any paperwork. As Cindy explained, there's simplified reporting. You don't have to report changes of income unless they go up, and you don't have to report reductions in hours unless they go down significantly. So there might not be as much reporting or paperwork requirements. And the application process is a little simpler now that it's online, and there are community partners who can help people. So those are all the things I would say to someone who says it's too much trouble. $20 is $20. If I found it on the street, I'd pick it up.
I would also add that we also encourage folks to look at it as a way to build up some money to pay for a holiday meal. You know, they don't have to spend that $20 in the month that they get it. They can accumulate some SNAP benefits over time.
Great idea.
And
Any other?
sorry about that. All right. Well, so, you know, we're here at the 106 mark. You are more than welcome to stay on. Folks can drop off as they go, as they need to go back onto their Friday. If there is anything else that you want to share, please don't feel rushed. Thank you both so much for your knowledge. I do want to say we do have the second installment of this series on July 22nd. I will be sending that information out through the statewide training initiative on our LinkedIn. The CLE number, this recording, and any materials from our presenters will be sent out within 24 hours via Zoom. If you do not receive those, please just reach out to me directly. Additionally, if you need assistance getting information for the rest of the series, please reach out to me directly. So I'm going to pop my email into the chat. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to let our presenters either offer any closing remarks or anything that they would like to say.
Just that we appreciate everyone's interest.
Yeah, we appreciate Florida Legal Services for helping us put this together. And feel free to reach out if you have food stamp questions.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. It is my pleasure to showcase you, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this series as we go forward.
See
So with that,
everybody in July.
All right. With that, I am going to stop the recording.